So for today's show, I have a very interesting guest. I'm here with Tom Lynam, and he is the marketing manager of Arkivum. And I don't want to say too much about Arkivum because he's probably like tenfold better than me in explaining what the folks up to there. But essentially, Arkivum is focusing on archiving and digital preservation of valuable data. And we probably, we're super interested to learn, number one, what that means and who is using that and which type of data has to be preserved and archived. And, so far they stand essentially for long-term security and integrity of data for their clients and partners. So, Tom, I really appreciate that you joined us for Pathwing Presents today.
That's no problem. Thank you for having me.
Very good.
We focus on digital archiving and preservation, which sort of comes under the banner of long-term data management, and where we sort of differ from a normal data storage, whether it's a hard drive or someone who's got some cloud storage, is around this sort of 100% data integrity guarantee for kind of as long as you need to keep that data for. So the longer you keep data for, the more likely it is to be corrupted, be damaged, or even simply just lost. We all, on a personal level, probably have USB sticks or external hard drives around the house with various photos or old documents. So, as individuals and organizations, we're generating more and more data every day. And what our tool does is help you preserve that. So, as a quick example, we'll be storing it in multiple locations. We'll be running checks on it to make sure that it's not been corrupted. And all of this is automated. And then we also have sort of preservation as well, which looks at if you think you're storing a Word document or a PDF or a PowerPoint file for 10, 20 years, what's the likelihood of you being able to actually access that document and read that document if you're accessing it on a machine 20 years in the future? Is going to be very unlikely. So what our tool will do is sort of automatically keep it up to date. So that's a very sort of quick overview of what we do. We work with sort of quite specific use cases in a number of different industries. So where Arkivum sort of traditionally grew from was working with higher education organizations, both in terms of storing their special collections data. So old records, many of which were digitized, so old letters, old photos, that sort of thing, and also their research output. So this research would be funded and a certain amount of it would be published, but also there was a lot of kind of the data which sat behind that, which needed storing. Okay. More recently, we've moved into pharmaceuticals and life sciences sectors, which is very highly regulated, and there are requirements around storing and ensuring that that data is accessible for decades. So one area we look at is things like clinical trial data. And another area we're particularly interested in is around scientific research. So last year, we were one of a few organisations selected to be part of the Archiver project, which is a sort of EU-backed project led by CERN, the guys who own the Hadron Collider, generating lots and lots of data and about really kind of running digital preservation at a scale that I don't think has been done ever before. So lots of different use cases in quite sort of different industries, but a really interesting areas to be working in.
I'm interested actually, because obviously you being the marketer and the team there, and you mentioning those different use cases, like how would you describe like a typical journey, right, of somebody getting to know about Arkivum and getting started? Like what would you consider sort of the top client acquisition channels that people walk through?
So for us, it's I mean, I can break that down into a couple of areas. I think the first is that it's very different conversations for the different customer sort of personas, as you were. They use very different language, and the level of knowledge is actually quite different around preservation. So, if we take people with a research background, they know about archiving. They might not have as much knowledge around the digital element, but often they do. Whereas some of the newer industries that we're working in, there's a lot of education around actually how is preservation and archiving different to just backing up or storing data. So, I mean, in terms of both audiences, we take a very content-driven approach. We offer a lot of guides, blogs, ebooks, that sort of content, and particularly in the last year with the pandemic, we've been promoting out a lot of that content through our digital channels, and that's very much been our focus. And we also look at we've got quite a sort of focus on PR as well to both get the Arkivum brand out into those sectors, but also sort of help push out those more educational messages that we need to get out into the marketplace.
Very cool. Yeah, for everybody who's interested, actually, you can head over to arkivum.com/blog, and you will actually find one or the other articles of Tom himself. I think the last one was about managing your ETMF archive. So super, super interesting. Now that the blog is, part of the strategy of growth, like what role would you attribute to the website? Like what role would you say the website plays in, client acquisition?
I mean, to be honest, at the moment, particularly at the moment, it's one of our primary sort of lead generation tools. It is actually about to go through a restructure, hoping to put a lot of it's built in the back end, and we're hoping to go live in the next week or so. And I think that's just an example of how important that channel is for us both, in kind of every stage of that customer journey, up until acquisition and even after acquisition. I think I mentioned in the earlier question around sort of the education piece, and starting to introduce certain ideas around how preservation differs to the backups and so forth, through to sort of slightly more complex content. But the website at the moment really is our kind of primary channel for obviously hosting that content and also driving people towards it.
Very cool. Obviously, as a marketer, you probably are super critical with the website always. At least that's, I would say, what 80% of all of our guests on the Pathmark Presents show, because we talk a lot about the websites and how they perform. What would you say is the major strength of the website?
I think at the moment the amount of content that we've got on it. I think, as you said, marketing people tend to be very critical of probably their own website and others. I think for me, the areas that it needs improving is telling the story more from a customer perspective. So talking about the challenges that they're facing and when they come to the site, what's they're coming to the site with a problem, with a challenge that they need help overcoming. And how do they quickly find, if our solution is applicable, how do they quickly find the right information? And then sort of secondary to that is making sure that there's enough of the sort of hooks throughout the website to make sure that, that there's interesting content there to hopefully convert, but if not, sort of, understand more about the product, understand more about the content that we're writing, the sort of thought leadership type stuff, and feel that, at the very least, they've learned something by coming to the site.
Very good. Yeah, you mentioned conversions there. As a marketer, sort of, what have you been thinking about in terms of, improving on conversions?
I mean, it's so I mentioned that the website project to improve that. Sort of in my planning, I think the idea has been to get the website up to a better sort of foundation level. And part of that is simply, making that content more visible across the site. Also, the appropriate amount of pop-ups, so not that they're becoming annoying, but that they're useful or at least perceived to be useful. And then I think beyond that, once we've got it to that foundation level, it's about taking it to the next level and increasing those conversion rates. And we'll probably actually get some agency support in there, experts in website design, do A/B testing on what sort of what order the content comes in, the call to actions, that sort of thing, and test what's most effective, and use tools, things like various sort of heat map ones, where are people scrolling to, all that sort of thing. Making sure we're using the tools that are available to really kind of optimize the conversions on the site. I think it's probably worth mentioning as well that sort of in addition to that, ultimately we see spikes in conversions on the site when we publish new sort of high quality premium gated content. So it's not just about tweaking the site to improve it, it's also making sure that we've got that really strong content calendar of high quality content which people are willing to I think today we've got to think of it in terms of they're paying for by providing their details. It's a good enough quality that someone's willing to do that. And so those are really kind of the two main areas of focus for me.
Super interesting, Tom. I would love to switch gears a little bit and talk about you, right, as a marketing leader in the team. I'm curious, like, how you educate yourself. Like, what's the type of content that you consume, right? Yeah, maybe you could give us an insight into how you sort of keep yourself updated.
Yeah, so I think there's I think LinkedIn is undoubtedly a fantastic tool at the moment, even if it is potentially veering into becomes that sort of very similar social media tool to all the others out there. But I think there's still a lot of good quality content and commentators out there, and so following the right sort of people.
Mm-hmm.
In the last year or so, I found a number of sort of online events or webinars. It is always good to kind of tap into them, although you do have to be careful. I think you sometimes get ones that sort of all ends of the spectrum. Some which are if any marketing professional is attending them, then they probably shouldn't be a marketing professional because it's at such a basic level. So you do need to be careful because you don't want to spend too much time on those sorts of sessions.
Makes sense.
I think beyond that as well, it's kind of learning from not just the team and getting I lead the marketing function at Arkivum, but you can never get enough feedback, I think, or at least ask for that feedback from the other members of the marketing team and the wider Arkivum team. Mm-hmm. Particularly working from home, we're all sort of working in a bubble in many respects. So making sure that you're constantly getting feedback on the things you're doing is a valuable tool, I think, for just seeing things in different perspective and challenging yourself to improve what you're outputting.
Mm. Super interesting. Since we're slowly coming to an end of the interview, I would love to, the last section of our interview is super interesting always to the listeners, since we're jumping into some rapid fire questions with some short and crisp question answers. Are you ready for those?
Yep.
Very good. What is the last book that you read?
The last book I read was, it's a historical fiction.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
Yeah, I actually have a history degree, so yeah, it's from the Anthony Taylor series. I can't remember I think it's The Last Protector. That's what it's called. Yeah.
Super interesting. What's the one single thing that the company is focused on most at the moment?
Growth, lead generation, growth.
If there would be no boundaries in technology, what would be the one thing that you would want to have fixed for the company today?
I think the website and having it as that sort of automated lead generation, have that whole digital piece to a point where it's generating a good number of leads for us each day, and then we can focus on other sort of strategic value add type activities. That would be the ideal place to be.
Very cool. What's the last thing that kept you awake at night about the company?
Oh, probably our user group, which we switched to. We switched to an online. It used to be a physical event, and we switched online. So it was a lot of sort of not fully tested. Well, I wouldn't say fully tested, but you know, there's nothing like doing a live event with lots of customers on, and you know, making sure that all ran
Sounds
smoothly.
nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Very good. Very cool. Actually, the last question that I would have is, if today, right, would be the very first day that you join the Arkivum team, what would be the one advice that you would give yourself if you would sort of restart from scratch being in a team?
Yeah, I think it would be to focus on the website earlier. I think, you know, it's such a valuable tool these days, and although it's fine, you know, I'm making it sound like it's terrible. You know, we actually get a lot of positive comments about it, but I think looking back, I would have probably prioritized work on it earlier. But you know, it's easier to say that now because you have lots of other things and other priorities to focus on.
Yeah. Tom, I really appreciate that you took the time with us today and being part of Pathfunk Presents. I want to give you the very last word, right? So if somebody would be forgetting everything that we just discussed in this interview, so what would be the one thing that they should remember about Arkivum? Yeah, what would be the one thing?
Yeah, I think it's really in, you know, in today's age where we're generating more and more data, to really think from a sort of strategic level how you're managing that in the long term. And I really do think, you know, I do believe that organisations, regardless of the sector they're in, who sort of manage their data not just in the now but in the long term, will gain a competitive edge. So to really consider your data from a long-term perspective and not just in the now and managing it today.
Very good. This was Tom Lynam from Arkivum. Thanks a lot for being part of the show.
No problem. Thank you for having me.